I'm Mark Z, and you're watching Thorin, the best interviewer behind Travis Gafford.
An area of great teams I find very interesting to analyse, and a model from which to break them down involves how you balance the squad. So, for example, in the game, I personally think that the style that you have comes not just from the specific personnel, but the balance of them. How many weak side players you have, how many players who are willing to sacrifice, how many players who play tanks, how many carries do you have, how many players who have to be played around and have resources followed through them. How you decide these things determines how you will best play, who you'll match up with, who counters to you. But actually, even on a personality level, I think the balance within a team, depending on the core values and identity of the team, are essential. And so you look at TSM, an organisation with an incredible amount of domestic success, winning or reaching the LCS finals in their first 10 splits of play. Even then, they are a squad who has not been afraid to cycle out talent, and are famed not just for finals appearances, but reaching the final no matter what in years gone by. Now, this was not simply due to being the best team and having the best players, the best coaches, despite what their fans may tell you. It wasn't even the case for a bunch of splits. Like I said so in this video here, where I pointed out some of the nightmare splits and troubles they had, but they still made the finals nonetheless. Now, part of their essential identity, which comes from Reginald, now he perceived the game and competition, was like a fairnessness that like winning's everything. You have to win now and not later, short term, and then you build that in the later. You have the massive expectations. You literally demand people do certain jobs, whether they're necessarily capable or whether it's responsible. So you just demand it, and then at the end, you push them as hard as you can, and you hope at the end you get a lot of success. But you know what? Like a lot of teams that had that kind of a formula, Manchester United in football, obviously in American football, the Patriots, it breaks people. It messes with them, it fucks with them, it skews them, it warps, it makes them less, or it makes them more in a certain way, and then eventually you have to throw them away. So as a result, you have a big churn of players. And as a result, I think what you find is, yes, their ability to course correct during the splits, incredible, especially during times when it looked like otherwise it failed and need to be blown up. And then locking into that playoff mode, they get better and better and better. And when they get to those finals, they've won many times. The downside is that massive strain it places on the players. It's broken many of them. It's seen many of them have to go to other teams to rehabilitate themselves, often very different squads. And TSM themselves have to scramble for new players over and over. Now, what's funny is the suggestion that TSM breaks players is obviously one that you have to put in context. It's not like they break them for no reason and just maliciously. They essentially break players by limiting them or chopping them or squeezing them into a certain shape or forcing them to play a certain way or giving them limited options. And so what they really do is break off the parts of this person that doesn't fit through the TSM shaped hole, and then they make TSM their style. That's their identity as well. So you break the player to fit him into TSM. Not just TSM in terms of the squad, but let's break it down. The styles that they play, the expectations, the paradigm of what TSM means, however successful and flawed that may indeed be. But to me, Doublelift stands as an outlier to this, and in doing so, and the more recent squad that he was a part of that won numerous championships, I think it actually reveals the secret to TSM in the modern day, which still harkens back to some of those core values, those identifying branding elements, as it were. And that is, in the early days, stemming from Reginald's time, it was about top-down strict discipline with one guy who has the final say. You have to listen to Reggie. Eventually, Bjergsen would obviously be fulfilling that role. And so you look at the players around. These are self-sacrificing players. These are followers rather than leaders. You have Dyrus. You have the odd one. Chaos. Sure, Chaos would push back a bit or do the pick and ban. But ultimately, what Reggie said still went. Reggie was still one of the best players in the team. And Chaos was just a player, and sometimes in theory a weak side player. Then you look, they had Santorin after that, they had Wild Turtle. Now Wild Turtle's personality, no brute force, no blunt element at all. But as a player, he was crazy. But even then, they reined him in. Famously, they told me he couldn't use Flash. That was one of the ways they took away one of his downsides, but in a sense, inhibited him as a player from being the best player he could be. Now with Doublelift's arrival, remember, he was coming from being kicked out of CLG for being too difficult. And that's despite some of his teammates obviously winning the championship with him. Some of his teammates felt they could not work with him, did not want to work with him anymore. It was also, by the way, breaking up the best NA bot lane, no less. So the perception, largely pushed, I admit, by the fanatical TSM fans who drunk the Kool-Aid too much, was that Doublelift would be intimidated in TSM. It's not like having hot shot and he'd be broken in by Reggie, and Reggie would use the belt or the whip or whatever the fuck. I actually think personally, the main thing that made Doublelift a better player as a teammate is he had a better group of players around him, less followers in this particular team than CLG, and as a result, Doublelift flourished. He had people who were his kind of people. Now, particularly with Bjergsen, the obvious one, because here's someone he could rely upon to carry, who would push back against him, who would make his own demands of Doublelift and the rest of the team. I think actually in CLG, Doublelift rarely ever had that type of a person or that type of approach brought forth to him. Link was one of the few people in theory who would speak up because of that manifesto, but he was passive aggressive. He wouldn't do it directly. He wouldn't actually resolve problems overall. And they would all just tell Doublelift he was a bad boy, spank him and put him in the corner, as it were, like a dog that's just shit on the floor but doesn't know what it's doing. So Doublelift tells this story in my Reflections interview, the most recent one with him, about him and Bjerg when the Yellow Star debacle was collapsing, basically just having a meeting and deciding, right, we're going to take over this team from Yellow Star. And as a result, I think it's the other way around. Doublelift made TSM fit to him where he needed it to. So he still respected Bjergsen enough to carry. But he led the lane and was vocal in conversations, as you see if you watch TSM Legends. I think Doublelift in this team was a more self-actualized, confident person because of who was around him. And as a result, he also wasn't labelled toxic. He was one of the best players and in fact was a leadership figure. I think even Haunter in this squad was very misunderstood because we hadn't seen him in later teams like Golden Guardians and heard more interviews with him. The key thing to me is Haunter is not what his game appeared to be. A sack top player, a weak side player who allows your two super carries in the other lanes to carry. He doesn't see himself as that type of a player. He doesn't perceive or model himself that way. He thinks he's a carry was on Golden Guns. He thinks he was a carry when he was on TSM and the absolute best top laner. I've talked to him. He thinks primarily he is a carry player, despite how alien that might seem. Even on Golden Guns, I see he's half and half between bruises and carries. But the key thing is he's stubborn. He makes jungle attention demands. He wanted carries when appropriate. Like Season 7 Spring. It was his time to carry, right? So he was all over him. He plays as if he's going to win the lane and win the game. Almost Jackie Love of the top lane with the other two best players, but he hasn't got that memo. Then you look at who else was in TSM. Sven and Bio, the supportive roles, are the more passive members who fit around these carries. Now, with three strong laners, all with strong minds, working together like a super stacked sports team, the Yankees with fucking A-Rod, Derek Jeter, etc., all winning, all that mattered was winning, which is what those guys can all agree upon as the Venn diagram between all their different personalities and styles and every other element. And what does TSM demand? Winning above all else. So it was about working around egos, putting a framework in, and then everyone finding ground where they push back and they have discussions and they kind of know who's top dog, what's where, and each of them goes out and performs. You look at the later TSM, the more recent one, Broken Blade seems like a forcible guy, but he's still pretty young to the game. He can't be that crazy overall, and the coaches will rein him in because of how fresh he is. Acadian didn't seem at all assertive. In the game, he was stylistically. As a person, not at all. But to be fair, he was a sub who'd been given a spot just because the other guy was injured. Bjergsen is his usual self, pretty commanding figure overall, but looked actually at times as though he took his foot off the gas a little bit, was sacrificing for others. Then you had Sven. They thought they were getting a Doublelift AD carry. Sven was never that. He's basically what Kobe is now, coming over from Europe. He plays with a support. He plays an Ezreal or a Jhin or something. No, it's more like that. He plays Ezreal or Jhin, moves around the map where Mithy tells him to, or Perks shots calls him, or whatever else. Smoothie, yeah, he's a shot caller, but he doesn't seem like the general takeover type of shot caller. He's like, you've got to listen to me, I demand it. He's like the guy where it's like, he'll give you the comms. He reminds me of Yellow Star and Aframu to some degree in this sense. But you need to want to listen to him. Otherwise, that's it. That's why I think his best time came in Cloud9 with Sneaky and Impact and players who will listen to him and then the right carries in the right places that he can help out. So to me, TSM recruiting Dardoch can actually help in this sense. Think of when Batman got put in the Bane pit prison, no big spoilers, in Dark Knight Rises. Like, if you can climb out of that, if you aren't broken by that, you can be actually the piece that saves the day. So it's not that TSM has to be one of those teams. They absolutely can change up the formula. They can go with a different type of players. I would say Cloud9's found a very different type of success. Like, they've generally, in the Reapid era, been around getting players that are less and less stubborn and abrasive and assertive, and getting players that are more willing to look to Reapid, the day leader, to some degree, and listen to everything he says and his plans, and he gets to have a lot of say in that team, a lot more agency than most NA coaches, and mould pieces. Hence why he loves these rookies he's brought in, and now literally has some of them as starters in the league over better players, MVP like Svenskeren, because even Svenskeren at one point in time wanted to push back and say, I'm an MVP and I want to play in the game and play this way, and Reaper pushed him out against that, and hence in comes Blabber for Worlds, and in comes Blabber as a starter now, even though he's not as good a player as Svenskeren. So I think with every team, again, the style, but also the role balance in the game needs to be based on the personnel and who their game is and what they are. But the personality, you need to balance that out as well based on who you are, but especially tying into what that core team culture is. What is that overall? TSM's isn't just to win at all costs and win a certain way. It could be something else. Then they can design that and then select personnel accordingly that are appropriate. This video was kindly supported by Alexander Rao, Blunt Smoking Anus Destroyer, Dane Cuskley, Dean Tanglis, Chi Mao, JDubs, NateDOhDoubleG, Peter the Feeder, Tobias Bernasconi, and a special thanks goes out to Jerky's Minion and Mohammed, Alabdul, Razzaq. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Maybe you'd like to ask me a question in my monthly Patreon AMA. Would you like teasers on upcoming content that I'm doing? Maybe you want to take part in a discussion directly with me? Well, if so, then put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today at the Patreon link in the description below.